My dear students, on the beginning of this year, we are going to talk about collapsing state. Yes, there is no other word to describe the situation of the country called Venezuela. In 24 hours, a 35 years old Venezuelan opposition leader declared himself the country's president. The United States recognized him as the legitimate head of state, and President Nicolas Maduro, president of Venezuela, ordered American diplomats out of the country. It was last week. This crisis is years in the making, and here is a little summary of how we came to this point. The first issue and the most important issue on the Venezuelan crisis is not, in my opinion, the attitude of the American, the attitude of the Western world, but first it is an economic issue. Let's talk about the economic crisis. Venezuela once had Latin America's richest economy, buoyed by oil reserves larger even than Saudi Arabia and Iran's. Yet, under Mr. Maduro and his predecessor and mentor, Hugo Chavez, who died in 2013, Venezuela's economy spiraled into mismanagement, corruption, and backbreaking debt. Hunger is killing Venezuelan children at an alarming rate, as stores have run out of food and children are suffering severe malnutrition. The country's hospitals are like something from the 19th century, according to testimonies, collapsing under chronic shortages of antibiotics, food, and other supplies. The desperate conditions have led to mass, sometimes violent demonstrations and skyrocketing crime that has forced Venezuelans to create ever-evolving countermeasures, like decoy cell phones, not to be stolen, and armored cars.
Want to trigger a recall referendum which could see Maduro ousted. They staged their largest demonstration for 2 years, during which the economy has continued to falter and there have been shortages of basic goods.
And inflation has ballooned to 1,000,000%, making money all but worthless. The economic collapse began in the ways Mr. Chavez wrested power, paid for loyalty with oil and purged his enemies. After he inherited a collapsing economy, Mr. Maduro, his successor, granted the military control of lucrative industries and printed money to dole out patronage, worsening the crisis but retaining power. Mr. Maduro has also held on by stifling dissent. Human rights groups say he has arrested more than 12,800 people. In 2018, he won a widely criticized re-election with reports of corruption, fraud, and electoral rigging. Mr. Maduro had also cracked down on the press, including the most important newspaper in the world, for example, the New York Times, kicking correspondents out of the country in 2016. Divided and stifled, the opposition has struggled to pose a challenge to Mr. Maduro until a National Assembly leader, Juan Guaido, managed to rally its factions in recent months. Mr. Guaido, a 35 years old industrial engineer who was little known at home or abroad until this month, declared himself president last Wednesday.
Juro asumir formalmente las competencias del Ejecutivo Nacional como el presidente encargado de Venezuela.
Outside Venezuela, the humanitarian and economic crisis in Venezuela has not stayed there, alarming its neighbors in Latin America, of course. Thousands of refugees have fled by land and sea to Brazil, Ecuador, and other nations, including Spain, USA, etc., increasing the tensions. 13 nations in North and South America denounced Mr. Maduro this month, urging him to stand over power to Venezuela's National Assembly to stabilize the country. The United States, long at odds with Mr. Maduro, has become increasingly vocal under, of course, President Trump, whose administration has imposed a series of sanctions and held secret meetings with rebellious military officers from Venezuela. Mr. Maduro has accused, for example, the United States of plotting a coup, and he claimed that unknown enemies used a drone to attack him during a military ceremony last year. To explain the crisis with numbers and charts, just watch those graphs showing, for example, the biggest problem facing Venezuelans. It is their day-to-day lives hyperinflation. Look at this. Of course, it has consequences on the GDP. President Chavez took advantage of the oil boom in the 2000s to borrow heavily and government spending soared. Then, during President Maduro's first term in office, the Venezuelan economy went into freefall. Many blame him and his socialist government for worsening the country's decline. President Maduro blamed imperialists, the likes of the US and Europe, for waging economic war against Venezuela and imposing sanctions on many members of his government. Although less than 50% of the crude oil production of Venezuela is currently exported to the US. So sanctions plummeting oil prices in 2016 compounded the oil-dependent country's crisis. The country hit crisis level the following year, with GDP shrinking by almost 6% and inflation soaring. Oil output has been declining since Venezuela is heavily reliant on the US for its oil revenue, sending 41% of its oil exports there. On 29th of January, the US imposed sanctions on Venezuela's state-owned oil firm PDVSA, saying proceeds of the purchase of Venezuelan oil would now be withheld from Mr. Maduro's government. But US Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the company could avoid sanctions by, of course, recognizing opposition leader Mr. Guaido. Of those questions for the country's annual living conditions survey, in 2017, 8 out of 10 said they were eating less because they did not have enough food at home. Venezuelan people are starving. 6 out of 10 said they had gone to bed hungry because they did not have the money to buy food. Here is the last chart showing the crucial choice Venezuelans have to make just to eat. Then, what's the most predictable exit to this crisis? In fact, I don't know. I don't know because logically, Maduro would have to dismiss unless this Guaido be the next president. But will it change a lot of things? I'm not sure. Even with a huge international aid from the UN or from humanitarian aid or from the US, I'm not think it's going to change rapidly. So I don't really know how the Venezuelan people will stop this crisis and will be able to be again the best, the most powerful and the most interesting economy of South America. And you, what do you think of this?